Exceeding Expectations, episode 34. Welcome to the podcast where we try to help you give your customers a better experience, which will hopefully then lead to you getting better testimonials, getting more referrals, which then means you spend less money on marketing, advertising, and enjoy your work more as well. I mean, a lot of the guests that we have on this show have the mindset where they really try to go out of their way to think of ways that they can give their customers a better experience, to try to exceed their expectations in some way. This week's guest is Scott Stanfield, who's been in the hospitality industry for about 25 years in many different ways as a chef, as a manager, and even starting from a dishwasher when he was a kid. Exceeding Expectations, we have a Facebook group. Please do look on Facebook for Exceeding Expectations. Join the group, get involved in some conversations, maybe start some conversations yourself, ask some questions, comment about something that you've heard. It would be great also if you would leave a review on one of the many podcast platforms. Obviously, the biggest one is iTunes, and the places such as Stitcher and Google Play and whatever. And if you do have any suggestions for any guests that you would like to hear interviewed on the show, please do get in contact. You can do that via the Facebook group. You can go on to exceedingexpectations.me or just send me an email at tony@exceedingexpectations.me and let me know about any guests that you would like to hear or suggestions you have. Hope you enjoy this week's show. Today I'm speaking with Scott Stanfield, who's been working in hospitality for a very long time. So how are you, Scott?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Tony?
I'm very good, thank you. So tell me a bit about I think it goes back quite a long time, your hospitality experience.
25 years ago, I started as a dishwasher at a restaurant on Lake Murray and just outside of Columbia, South Carolina.
Wow. And how did it progress from there?
90 days later, they offered me a job as a manager. So I was either in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the right time. I don't know which one it was, but
or you were a hell of a dishwasher.
Yeah, one heck of a dishwasher. Yeah. I'd already progressed to the kitchen where I was like, prep cook and a line cook where I was, cooking fried shrimp and fried oysters, fried scallops, fried flounder, French fries, obviously, that type of stuff, chicken fingers for the kids and expediting. But yeah, I ended up becoming a managing partner at that same restaurant that I started as a dishwasher. It was about 5 years later. Wow. So that really set my path on that. And, I also have worked on Hilton Head Island. I was a director of food and beverage at an oil refinery in the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, Virgin Islands, for 2 years. I've been a director of restaurants for a Hilton property in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been director of food and beverage at a hospital in Salt Lake City, and also a director of food and beverage for a Marriott autograph collection, a 4-star property in Park City, Utah as well.
And so where is it you are now then? I mean, you've moved around a lot, clearly, but where are you now?
I'm in the mountains of Colorado at a very historic hotel that was built in 1909.
Is it a restaurant that you have?
Yes, right now I'm the general manager of a restaurant for sure.
And what's the name of the restaurant?
Oh, it's Cascades and Whiskey Bar. It's at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado.
Do you have any sort of speciality? What is it that you do that makes you different?
Well, there's over 1,000. The last count was 1,149 whiskeys from around the world. So we specialize in whiskeys for sure. We also are a chef-driven restaurant. Chef Rich is a James Beard Award-winning chef. And so we've got great food that matches what we have on the back bar in terms of all our spirits and also with our wine list as well.
When you arrived there, did you make a lot of changes, or what happened after you arrived there?
Change is an interesting thing. It's easy if you're making the decision for change. So you have to observe for a bit unless there's something that's just like majorly going wrong. About 6 weeks after Chef Rich and I Chef Rich had worked here before. I mean, so this was a comeback song for him, where for me, it was just my first day. And so we were there about 6 weeks before the menu changed. And at the same time as a rollout, we did start training extensively on front of the house service standards, on the menu, and basic alcohol training, because there were people who were not even trained on whether we have scotches on the menu, and they were serving tables, and we had over, I don't know, let's say half of that would be almost 600 scotches that we have on behind the bar, and a server didn't even know if we served scotch or not. So we had to, we had the biggest piece was creating a chef-driven menu and starting a culture of training.
And so how would you go about something like that? What would you do, say, that would be different from how other restaurants would go about that?
Well, most training programs are, well, here's your number to log into the computer. Go follow Sally. She's the best server we got. Go shadow her, and we'll see how you're doing in a couple of days, and we'll start giving you some tables and go from there. That's what mostly happens. What I understand is that people learn in different ways. Some people learn by listening. Some people learn by reading. Some people learn by doing. So my first rule when it comes to day one is that it's an orientation day. We're going to give you some stuff to read. But we also are not going to allow you to talk to guests because you don't have any answers to the questions that they have. So what we do is we give the information, and we require people to actually sit down with us in the office and go over it. So they have to say it, they have to do it as well. So we want to make sure that, in the heat of the moment, tableside or behind a bar, when a guest asks them a question, that they have the answer, or they have the verbiage to be able to say, I don't know the answer to that question. Let me go find out, and I'll come right back. Because you may not, we don't know nobody knows every single whiskey on the bar, but we can find out the answer for that.
And I mean, when we were talking before the recording started, and we kind of touched upon the whole training issues, and you were talking about some Disney. What was it you were talking about Disney and how that relates to training?
Well, what I do is I find sources or examples in other industries so I can train my staff about how we can do something on a larger scale or do something on a better place. So what happened was, at my last position, we had a very reputable steak franchise, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. There's 150 locations worldwide, and they have a tiered pricing structure. And we had been, and it goes from 1 to 7, 7 being the highest. And what happened is that we were restructuring our pricing and matching tiers. And our first step was figuring out where we were, and our pricing was between a 2 and 3. And then so we went to a tier 4 pricing. And as we were making the transition into a tier 7 pricing, which is the highest that they had at the time, we were getting pushback from some of our guests. We were even getting pushback from some of our employees about thinking about how the prices were too high. And so I use this example from Disney because I asked them, I said, does anybody know what Disney did with their prices during the recession, 2007, 2008, for their theme parks? And everybody's assumption is that the price went down. But what actually happened is that they raised their prices 5 times. And then I asked them, I said, how do you think Disney can raise our prices 5 times in the worst economic times of our life? And nobody really knew the answer, but the answer was trust. What happened is that the brand had established such a level of trust with the customers and the people who wanted to come that people were willing to pay the price, even though the prices were going up, so they could experience what that brand was about. And so by using that example, we were able to overcome the objections or the value score that you would get on, say, TripAdvisor or Open Table reservation system. Because they break up the scores for your reviews into different things: food, service, value, ambiance, those type of things. And when you're charging, $94 for a porterhouse steak, or $119 at that location for a tomahawk steak, or $115 for a seafood tower as an appetizer, you're going to get some pushback. When people save up money to come once a year to celebrate their anniversary or their birthday, that the prices have gone up since last year that they were there. Maybe we've had two price, and we did. Sometimes we had a price increase more than once as seasons changed. So by establishing that and then saying, okay, then training your team how to establish trust was really a big thing for us. So how do you establish trust? Well, consistency. They trust that they know they're going to get the same service, and the service is going to be, the greet time is going to be, 30 seconds or a minute from when they're sat down, and meeting or exceeding all their expectations and anticipating what the guest needs, and getting an entire team of people to focus on that can move the needle to a level where your ranking on TripAdvisor may go to for instance, we were 18th when I started working there, and 2 years later we were ranked number 1 out of 200 restaurants, and so that's important, because as people look at reviews online, they consider it the same as if they're getting a recommendation from a close friend. And so if your restaurant's in the top 2 or 3 for your city, and there's a large amount of restaurants in that town, then they know and trust that when they walk in the door, they're going to be treated with respect, with dignity, and they're going to get what they pay for, or maybe even more than what they pay for. And so then prices can be raised and scarcity can be created at that point as well.
And when you say you were ranked number 1 out of 200, do you mean out of 200 steak restaurants, or just restaurants in general?
There was probably about 7 or 8 steakhouses, but that was of all the restaurants in Park City, Utah.
So therefore, I imagine you would get a situation where people would look upon you as being, the top restaurant in town or in the city, and so that would be the restaurant I want to go to for a special occasion.
Absolutely, and that's the whole point. So is that you want people there who are celebrating life, celebrating when graduation happens at the local high school, or if there's a university in your town, or their anniversary where they've coming, and you want to build it where you have multiple years in a row, consecutive years in a row, people are celebrating their anniversary, and that just builds and builds and builds upon itself, and so. That's a great way of building a small part of your business, but also that is consistent and grows over time.
And what kind of numbers are you able to accommodate?
We sat 225 people at one time.
How far ahead are people having to make sort of reservations to get a place?
It depends on the day. We from the back deck at Roost Chris at Hotel Park City. You could see the fireworks that on 4th of July, and people would actually make their reservation for the next year on that day. So a year in advance on some days, and sometimes 3, 4, 6 months, but in advance. But in restaurants right now, the trend we're seeing is about 46% of reservations are made the day of the dining event, unless it's a special event such as Valentine's, Easter, Mother's Day. Thanksgiving, things like that, people are getting in, because that's where the scarcity comes in. Because as you get more popular, as you consider the best restaurant in your town, people have to call earlier and earlier and earlier to make reservations. And some people who are used to the environment being where I could just walk in, and now they can't, and not even any seating in the bar is available as overflow because you're so busy. You actually sometimes frustrate some of the guests who've been coming there and supporting you when you were a little bit slower and the business wasn't as popular.
Before we started recording, you mentioned about there was a couple, I think you said it was last week, who were amazed by some of the personal service that you gave them.
Yes, the chefs that I work with now, Chef Rich and Ryan, had gotten in and ran a special for tomahawk steak, which is a 2-pound or 32-ounce steak, and the culture here at a restaurant that hasn't really served that high-end stuff, or the high-end food on that level that was selling for $99, there was nobody really trained on how do you serve a 2-pound steak to 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, to 1 person. And because of my experience at Roost Chris, we were trained as managers to serve this table side on a tray with a tray jack and, have a boning knife and explain to people, well, actually the first thing is you try to get the whole steak in front of somebody so they can take a picture so it could be posted on social media. So they will obviously tag you when they like, hey, I was here at Cascades and Whiskey Bar and I had this tomahawk. So that's the first thing is you're trying to do is you're working on this marketing edge to build organically through social media. But the second thing is you're actually explaining is like there's two parts of a ribeye. There's a decal, which some people call the rib cap, and then there's the eye. And I said, well, I'll basically what I'll do is I'll split these two pieces apart, and then I'll cut them both in half. And then I will, and using French service where you use a fork and a spoon in one hand, put them on the separate plates to where they need to go and realign them the right way to where the eye of the ribeye is in front of the person, and the decal is in the back. And then you're serving the lady first and then serving the gentleman and doing that. And so there was this one couple that were older, and I asked them, I said, do you want to take a picture of, with a steak in front of anyone? And they were of the age, I would imagine they were late 60s, early 70s. They didn't even have their phone with them. They had no way of taking a picture at all. And so I had my phone in my back pocket. So I set the steak in front of a lady and I said, do you mind if I take your picture? And I took a picture with her with the steak and I said, I'll email this to you. And so then I pulled the steak back. I carved the bone off. Then I split it between the two of them, separated, served them. And because now the general manager is out on the floor interacting with them on that level, I can now come back and have a little bit deeper conversation with them, and ask them how their steak was cooked and those things and really connect with them. And then once I did that, I got their email address. I emailed them the picture, and the gentleman emailed me back and he said, it was absolutely, and I'm getting chills right now thinking about this. But he goes, the experience was absolutely amazing. Thank you for bringing back the legacy of service to the Stanley Hotel. And it was absolutely, that was a heartwarming email. And and when you think about the legacy of the Stanley that was built in 1909 by, F.O. Stanley, who he and his twin brother created the Stanley Steamer car. You think about an entrepreneur and, somebody who's as innovative as he was. You can only imagine how the service would have been at a hotel he built 110 years ago. And that carrying on that legacy is important to me.
And as you were saying that, it made me think about, because you mentioned about the whole kind of social media side of it as well. So how has social media changed restaurants and what you do?
It's changed dramatically. I think it's raised the pressure on what we can do, what mistakes we can make, because everybody that comes in there, for all practical purposes, can be a food critic or service critic, and so the old adage of, somebody who has a bad experience tells 10 people who tells 10 people who tells 10 people, now 100 people know, still rings true. But I think there's another thing too, is that we can get, more direct feedback from people who are maybe afraid or apprehensive to tell us tableside what's going wrong. And so I think we can use it as a tool that helps us to get better on a day-by-day basis versus looking at it as a negative. In Seth Godin's book, Purple Cow, he says your business should be something that's remarkable. And he defines remarkable as something worth making a remark about. And I think that goes both ways. I think something can go so bad that it's worth making a remark about, and something can go so good that it's worth making a remark about. And so that's our focus with that. When I started this business going on 26 years ago, I didn't have a cell phone. I had no email account. We were still calling the bank to see if our credit cards went through each day when they batched after the batch was out, and writing it down on a legal pad. I mean, for people who are, have a smartphone now, that seems archaic because you can even scan documents and use Excel spreadsheets on your phone. It's just really amazing, the technology and how far it's come. So, adapting as we, and using these tools for good, instead of looking at them as a negative, I think is really the most important piece of them.
You mentioned before about I mean, you've obviously you've worked in many different places over the sort of the past 15, 20 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned to me about a franchise you were working in. It taught you you learned a lot about pricing.
When Ruth's Chris on their 50th anniversary rolled out a menu they called the 2.0 menu, where they changed some of the appetizers. Now, the starring roles are still obviously prime grade steaks, the filet mignon, served on a plate, 500 degrees, sizzling in butter. But what happened is that when we were rolling out the new menu, we were looking at the where our pricings fit into the tiers, and we found that we could, once we had gotten good enough that the question of whether we were serving, a steak on a plate that was served a la carte, the question of the value went down, and the score for the value went up as our reputation went up, and as our service went up, and as our team got better.
How do you try to ensure that you stay ahead of everyone else?
It's not about everybody else. It's about being the best we can be as a group, as an organization. Okay. Obviously, the metric we have is how are we compared to other restaurants on social media, and how that happens, with like Yelp and, Facebook, and, even when Google Plus was around, and, or even back in the day, the old Michelin star piece, how that was the only thing in town, there, which is still a big piece of what we do is, in the restaurant world. But for us, what I focus on is not how we compete against the other person, but how can each individual in their station be the best they can be. And then also as a collective, how we can, as a team, be the best we can be. And if we're the best that we can be, then we'll be the best restaurant.
And so does that mean actively keeping a watch on the reviews that are posted about you on sites such as TripAdvisor?
Absolutely. Just this morning, there was a review that came in that was a 3-star, and it said, I was on Open Table, and I have the Open Table app on my phone, and I was looking at it, and I took screenshots, and I figured out who was, and I looked at our app that has our scheduling, and I looked at who the schedule hostess was, and the server that was assigned to the table. It looks like the server was switched at some point, and I didn't know why. And so the review was rather odd, where it said that they had to wait 20 minutes while the host was still on the phone, which we don't typically have phone calls that last 20 minutes at the host stand. So I don't know what happened there. And they said they had to wait 15 minutes for the server to show up. So basically what I did is I took screenshots of this on my phone, and then went into the messaging portion of the scheduling app, and sent it to the manager and the people who worked on that day, and asked them, I said, this just seems kind of odd. It doesn't make sense to me. Can you help me understand, what happened here? And so, yes, we do. We actually, one of the things we do too is we put up what I call a scoreboard. And so on the office door, we have by each month, we'll write down which platform. So we print out the logos for each platform that we're focusing on. Right now, it's OpenTable and TripAdvisor. And we'll write down what our beginning average score is for the month, what our ending average score is at the end of the month, and then also every review score. So 5, 5, 5. Hopefully they're all 5s. 5, 5, 5, 4, 3. And then we'll give an average for the month. And then we'll look at other things like intent to recommend score on OpenTable, because that's something that we think is important as well. And then so at the bottom of the door we have right now is December. Then we have January, February, March. So we're putting the scoreboard up, and for the current month, we'll actually post the actual reviews that were written, and we do the bad ones and we do the good ones. We'll highlight the good ones when people's names are mentioned. We'll give them, a recognition card that they can take to HR and get a prize for. And so scores are a big thing. We're posting those, we're keeping up with those. And we want our staff aware of what the scores are. And it's really funny because we had a server when I first started here that tend to come across kind of short with the guests. And then once we started recognizing people for giving great reviews, that server's name started popping up as giving great service. So all we had to do was post the reviews, put it in front of them, make them aware of them. And it started changing the nature where people were getting recognized. They weren't getting recognized for their sales. They weren't getting recognized for how much they made in tips. They weren't getting recognized for not calling in sick. They were getting recognized for actually getting their name mentioned positively in a 5-star review. And it started changing the whole culture of the entire organization. And all we had to do was tape it up on the wall.
I mean, obviously training is a big thing for you. The people that come to work for you, do you get remarks from them along the lines of, well, this is what you do and the training you do is completely different to other places I've been working at?
The most recent quote was, Scott, we've never worked for anybody that actually took restaurants so seriously. But yes, I do get a lot of, this is very unique. Nobody's really cared as much about us as an organization. Or express as much empathy, or has been this calm, didn't yell at us. So, yes, I get that. I get that a lot.
I imagine that also then therefore makes it more enjoyable for them to work there as well.
That's the whole goal, right? Is to have fun. The restaurant world, hospitality world, I mean, if you ever have looked at a front desk, at check-in time, 3:30, 4 o'clock at a, it can get intense because they've got sometimes have to check in, it depends on the size of the hotel. Smaller hotels is even more intense because people want late checkouts at resorts. And then then that puts a crunch on housekeeping to get those rooms flipped in sometimes 2 to 3 hours before check-in at 4 o'clock. Those front desk people have, intense jobs when it comes to check-ins. And restaurant people have intense jobs because you have to really think about this, is that we have raw materials coming in the back door sometimes that morning. And we turn that into a product. Our sales team sells that. We deliver that product in 20 minutes or less. And we try to do it on a very high level. And we take and then we get payment for that. And our service staff is being judged to see in America, there's a tip-based system. So they're getting judged on every aspect of service to make money so they can pay their bills or even go on vacation or whatever they're going to do, with that. And so, and they have different things happen at different times. You have 4 or 5 table section, and you have one table you're greeting, you got one you're giving dessert, you got one that's on entrees and needs to be cleared, another one wants another bottle of wine. So you're having to balance all those things at one time. And so it's a very high stress situation. And so the last thing that a leader needs to do in that type of environment is create more stress. You need to be the calming piece of that and help them in any way you can. And if there's something turned sideways, to be the one to help them fix it.
You mentioned that social media has really sort of changed the industry over the last 5-10 years. How do you see things changing in the next 5-10 years?
I think the intensity in which people go out to eat and expect a high level dish, meaning that they want to see on their table in front of them, a lot of people, what they see on chef's table on Netflix. Right. And they're going and the expectations are rising. The other thing that's happening too is that this is one of the big things I've seen happen over the last 2 years is that the speed in which what's hitting the trends that are on social media in terms of food and then is hitting the grocery store. Typically, our broadline suppliers are slow to react to those trends, and you can't get those food items. You can't get those into the restaurant fast enough, typically. And I'm seeing that change where in the vegetarian vegan world, there's this new burger, our new product called the Impossible Burger. And it's something that just barely is just emerging, but it's really big in the vegan world. And what happens is we have it on our menu here, but I just saw on LinkedIn this morning that Red Robin is going to have that in like every restaurant that they have. And so here's a vegan option is making it into, I think it's like 400 locations relatively quickly to where someone who like me, who's cared about their health for a while, I can go into a grocery store, health food store, or Whole Foods, and then I try to get a product to put on a menu that I like and I think is a better product. And then being told by my sales rep, be going, well, retail and wholesale are different, supply chains, and we can't get that. And so I think that's one of the things that's going to speed up, because our customers are putting pressure on us. Therefore, we're putting pressure on our suppliers to get these items that are in the grocery store and prepare them in a way that they would like them in a restaurant.
Do you think people generally are more health conscious these days? And is that being reflected in what they ask for when they come to your restaurants?
This in pockets really depends on the city and where you're at, or what type of restaurant you're in. I think we've seen a big huge increase in gluten-free. There's a lot more people who are gluten intolerant here in the States than there have been in the years past. That was something that never, ever came up in my first probably 15 years working in the industry. I never even knew what gluten-free was. And then now it's like something that happens where it needs to be listed on the menu so people can make choices. And you have to train your staff on what that means. You have to, the chefs obviously have to know what that means. And so there's other things that happen. Now you've got people who are ketogenic, which is low carb, high fat, moderate protein. You've got paleo. And so I think that what the definition of healthy is very broad, but it is growing in a way for sure.
I'm going to be respectful of your time. So before we finish, what are your thoughts on exceeding expectations and over delivering?
There's no other way. There's no other way. If we do not exceed expectations, we have failed. That should be one of your top goals. So I start with why. I try to bend our staff's reality a little bit and try to explain to them that money is the result of what we do. It's not why we're here. Why we are here is to deliver the best dining experience in a chef-driven restaurant that's located in a historic hotel. And if we make all our decisions based off why we're here, like if somebody asks me, well, it's kind of slow, can I go home? I'm like, well, let's think about this for a second. It's spring break. Last night we had 45 walk-ins, and it may appear it's going to be slow, but if you went home, would that help us as a team deliver the best dining experience to the people who walked in that we don't know that's coming yet? And so they would kind of look at me and go, well, you're right. Okay. Or if they really were self-centered, they would say, well, still, can I go home? Because I don't really care. Right. So then you got to bend the reality a little bit more, say, no, actually, you can't go home. I really think I need you. And then monitor their attitude from that point forward in that time. But if your focus is delivering the best experience, whatever your business is, whether it's best hotel stay, best dining experience at a taco stand on the street corner, best dining experience in a chef-driven restaurant, or, I don't know, if you sell costumes and balloons, the focus should be on exceeding expectations. So that guest will actually have an experience, and I'm going back to the Purple Cow, that's remarkable enough to make a positive review on, whether it's to their friend or their family or online.
Scott, if people want to find out more about you and about Cascades and everything that you're involved in, where should they go?
Well, the Cascades, you can find out more information about that at the StanleyHotel.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Scott R. Stanfield. And then I have, then you can find me in other places there. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Well, all of that will be included in the show notes. I really appreciate your time, Scott. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tony.
Next week, episode 35 is with Jessica Schwartz. She's a book author and writer, and she tells us a lot about the book world and some of the experiences she's had and how she's been able to help people. Hope you've enjoyed this week's episode as normal. Please do leave a review, get involved in the Facebook group, maybe post some questions, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week.